Imagine the heartbeat of the global economy slowing down, not because of wars or pandemics, but because the ocean itself is creeping inland. Crazy thought, right? But it's not sci-fi. A major maritime study shows that some of the world's largest ports, the literal gateways of international trade, could become inoperable by 2050 if sea levels rise just 4% due to climate change. These aren't tiny harbors. We're talking about places that handle billions of tons of cargo, energy exports, and economic lifelines for whole countries. Today, we dive deep into the top 3 of these vulnerable ports, where they are, why they matter, what could happen if they sink, and what this means for us all. Buckle up. Number 1. Shanghai Port. Let's kick things off with a name you already know. Just say that out loud. The busiest port on Earth. It handles more cargo than New York, Rotterdam, and Singapore combined in many years. A true beast of global trade. That's the kind of place where economies around the world live or die. But here's the twist. Shanghai sits right at sea level. Yup, that sprawling port complex that acts as the gateway between China and pretty much every other major economy. It's in the crosshairs of rising oceans. According to the Global Maritime Trends 2050 study, Shanghai is one of several major ports that could be rendered inoperable by 2050 if sea levels rise only 40 centimeters, which is well within climate projections if emissions go unchecked. So why is that such a big deal? Well, Shanghai isn't just a port. It's a global artery for manufacturing and exports. Everything from electronics to textiles flows through its terminals. If tides start regularly washing over those docks, imagine the domino effect. Ships stuck at sea, delayed goods, skyrocketing prices for products we take for granted. And it's not just sea level rise. Higher tides mean more frequent storm surge flooding, more saltwater damage to infrastructure, and even corrosion of critical machinery. The city has some defenses, sure. Flood barriers, levees, and ports around the world look to systems like Holland's Maesland Barrier or London's Thames Barrier as inspiration. But these are temporary game plans, expensive and energy-intensive to maintain. Number 2. Port of Houston, heading west across the Pacific to the Port of Houston in Texas, USA. If you've heard of Houston, you probably think of NASA or big oil, and right you are. But this port is where a huge chunk of America's energy exports and industrial goods flow out to the world. Now picture this, the Gulf of Mexico. Monster tankers loaded with crude and liquefied gas, and the machinery that keeps America's supply chains humming. That's Houston's port system. And yes, it's also on the list of ports that could become unusable by mid-century. Why? It's all geography and climate change. Houston's coastline is low-lying, and with the Gulf swallowing more shoreline each year due to sea level rise plus stronger storm surges. Every hurricane season looks scarier than the last. That means flooding that could shut down terminals for weeks, damage infrastructure, and cost billions in lost cargo and repairs. Now let's talk about impact. We're not just talking about empty shelves at Walmart. Houston handles huge volumes of crude oil, chemicals, and container freight that feed into manufacturing and energy markets across the globe. Disruption here ripples far beyond Texas. Energy prices could spike, fuel supplies could strain, and entire industries might have to scramble for alternatives. And seriously, it's not just a hypothetical. Weather-related disruptions are already happening in ports worldwide. For instance, the Panama Canal, a critical shortcut connecting the Pacific and Atlantic, was hit by drought conditions that disrupted traffic. Yeah, a drought messing up sea routes. Number 3. Ras Tanura. All right, shifting gears and heading to the Middle East. Saudi Arabia's Ras Tanura port. This one doesn't have the thunderous container traffic of Shanghai, but it's insanely important for another reason. Oil exports. Ras Tanura isn't just a port. It's almost the main artery for Saudi crude in global markets. Along with its sister port Yanbu, these ports exported roughly $214 billion worth of oil in 2023, representing almost 20% of global oil exports. That's a staggering amount of energy flowing out of a couple of coastal terminals, and you can already see where this is going. Here's the twist of epic irony. The very energy industry that has driven the world's economy and powered decades of development is now part of what fuels climate change. The same climate change that threatens the infrastructure holding it all together. The International Cryosphere Climate Initiative found that a 1-meter sea level rise, a level likely within this century if current trends continue, would seriously damage supertanker ports like Ras Tanura and Yanbu. That means jetties, loading arms, storage tanks, and access roads could be compromised or even submerged. So why does that matter beyond the Middle East? Simple. global energy markets would feel it instantly. If Saudi crude can't flow smoothly to refineries in Asia, Europe, or North America, prices spike, supply chains tighten, and countries scramble for alternatives. Energy security becomes a real crisis, not just an economic buzzword. And consider this, 98% of Saudi oil exports leave from Ras Tanura and Yanbu. If even one of these facilities faces repeated flooding or infrastructure failures, the shockwaves could be massive. We're talking ripple effects on transportation costs, fuel availability, and geopolitical tensions as nations compete for limited energy supplies. All right, let's drop one more bonus port into the mix. And it's a big one that doesn't get nearly enough spotlight, the port of Chattogram in Bangladesh. This isn't a tiny harbor. It's the economic heartbeat of Bangladesh, handling roughly 90% of the country's seaborne trade and providing the essential gateway for everything from food imports to industrial raw materials. That's huge for a developing economy already wrestling with population growth and climate pressures. Now here's where the story gets intense. Chattogram sits at the edge of the Bay of Bengal, in a region that's incredibly vulnerable to rising sea levels, storm surges, and extreme weather, especially since the area already floods frequently during monsoon seasons. That's not some distant theory. Recurring floods have already caused waist-deep water on nearby highways and forced cargo vessels to wait offshore, stacking up delays and economic losses. So what's at stake if Chattogram's port operations are disrupted by sea level rise? First off, Bangladesh's entire trade system could grind to a halt. And remember, 90% of trade flows through this single port. Delays in unloading or loading cargo translate directly into supply chain slowdowns, skyrocketing costs for imports like food and fuel, and losses for industries reliant on timely delivery of materials. In short, if Chattogram starts going under, the entire nation feels it. Okay, let's bring it home. We've looked at Shanghai, Houston, Ras Tanura, and the port of Chattogram. These aren't small dots on a map. They're pillars of the world economy. And the science is clear. Rising sea levels driven by climate change could seriously harm or even render these ports unusable within decades, unless massive adaptation efforts kick in. Wild stuff, right? If you learned something new today, subscribe for more deep dive stories like this. Comment below. Which port do you think is most at risk? Catch you in the next one.